Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this webinar on housing and homelessness through a climate change lens. I'm Adriana Champagne-Zamora. I'm the Trudy Schaefer Public Policy Fellow with the League of Women Voters of California. Today's webinar will be moderated by myself and my colleague, Julissa Rodriguez. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Julissa.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Graciela Rodriguez. I'm also with the League. I work as the Public Policy and Organizing Manager, and I'll go ahead and hand it back to Adriana.
Awesome. Our first speaker today with us is Graciela Castillo-Krings. She is a lobbyist with Sacramento Advocates and has more than 15 years experience in various public service roles in California government. And I will leave it to her to begin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're really excited to be talking to you today and really wanted to kind of highlight the intersection between housing, homelessness, and climate change. I don't think it's a surprise to any of you that climate change is the most, the biggest threat right now facing our state. And it has an impact on everything we do moving forward. It's going to take us years to get out of it. It did not happen overnight, but we actually have solutions that are not easy, but can actually help us weather the storm. So when we think about homelessness and climate change, the most obvious thing is some of the health impacts it has on people. When you think of extreme fires, when you think of just extreme weather patterns, the heat waves that California has been experiencing, just also in other parts of the country, when you think about some of the snowstorms and the impact that has on the human body. If you're not sheltered, that's going to be really difficult. You think of, I'm just thinking of the last couple of years where California has had these enormous wildfires that have completely put us at risk. And one of the health advisories was stay indoors. Make sure that you are protecting your lungs. Make sure you're not letting children or young ones, any vulnerable populations, stay outside. The problem with that is if you don't have a place to shelter, that is very difficult to do. So not only does that increase health impacts on a lot of the people that are experiencing homelessness, but it really makes it difficult for them to actually stay alive. That's kind of the reality. The other issue, so that is on one hand, the type of extreme weather patterns and the impact it can have. But at the end of the day, the other thing that it actually does, a lot of these extreme weather patterns, wildfires, they actually also destroy the limited housing supply that California has. So just to kind of give a couple of numbers, when you think about the 2018 Camp Fire, it actually destroyed 15,000 homes and displaced 50,000 people. That's just a 1 year. That's just one fire. So when you actually aggregate all of the large fires California has had, the supply becomes even more. We have more of a crisis when it comes to supply. So that is another issue that we think about. But then if you take a look at who some of these fires are impacting because of the shortage that we have in housing. So let me step back. A lot of people have been going inland, right? As the coastal urban areas in California have become more expensive, people move inland. And in fact, I live in Sacramento and I've seen this in the last couple of years. Sacramento 20 years ago was a pretty affordable place. People could actually either rent a single family home or they could buy one. They could rent an apartment for pretty affordable prices. In the last couple of years, especially this was exacerbated with the pandemic, as people started having ability to move and continue to work, some of them did, Sacramento has actually seen increases in prices. And it was already happening even prior to pandemic. As the Bay Area became so expensive, people started coming to Sacramento, Stockton areas, and people that normally found Stockton more affordable, but could no longer compete with some of the Bay Area prices, started going in even further in, which actually creates a lot of pressure for people to start expanding into more of the high fire areas. And so most of the people that are going inland are also people of color, people that have less means. And so when you think of the fires and the impact it has on those communities, the people that are actually impacted the most tend to be low income people. And so this just becomes a really vicious cycle. People then that are impacted by these climate patterns end up also then not having the resources to relocate in California, or might have more of a challenge. They end up either in overcrowded conditions, or they end up homeless. And so you can see how this becomes a bit of a cycle. Now, The other thing is, as people continue to basically live further and having to kind of rely on transportation, usually cars, to get to the jobs, it exacerbates greenhouse gases. So the further you drive, the further you have to go to find affordable housing, the worse climate change is going to be. Because the reality is, most of the time you're driving to an area that might not have a strong or robust job center, or it might not have as many opportunities for you. So you always have to come back into a more urban core and drive more, driving up greenhouse gases, which again, it's kind of just perpetuating the cycle. So one of the things is, climate change is not only creating weather, basically creating these really difficult weather patterns that create the perfect conditions for bad storms, mudslides after a fire that destroy homes, creating more displacement, creating pressures for a lot of people, and that actually exacerbate homelessness. It also exacerbates the housing shortage, and really is starting to impact just the entire situation here in our state. However, it also is creating an opportunity. Never before have I heard, until recently, the intersection and people really talking about how climate, housing, homelessness are all interlinked and intertwined. People are starting to realize that how we actually build communities is important. How we ensure that people are going to be safe from wildfires, storms, all of these other floods and things like that, is how we actually build communities, how we house them. And so I think we are at a point where we have an opportunity to really create positive change in our state. And I'm going to stop there because I think the presentation that is coming next will kind of just highlight the opportunities.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I will introduce our next speaker, Amanda Brown-Stevens, who is the Executive Director of the Greenbelt Alliance and is nationally recognized expert in climate smart development and resilient communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic. I think it's a really critical one, and touches on a lot of the issues that we care about the most. So I am just going to share a presentation here. Hopefully this will work smoothly. So Graciela talked a bit about really providing the context for some of the challenges we're facing as a region and as a state around this dual challenge of housing affordability, homelessness, and the climate crisis. And what I'll talk about a little bit today is that we really are, just building on what she talked about as far as there are some solutions. There are really ways that we together can implement strategies that actually address both of these challenges in a way that make our communities better as well. So although these are big challenges and creating a lot of problems, we do have some really straightforward and positive ways to actually start to reverse the trend that we're on here in California related to both housing and the environment. So just before I get into the conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about Greenbelt Alliance in case you're unfamiliar with us. Greenbelt Alliance is an environmental nonprofit. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to make the Bay Area's lands and communities more resilient to a changing climate. We work on land use policy advocacy, regional collaboration, and we do research, we create tools, and we get involved at the very local level with community-based organizations, with residents who want to get involved to make their community better, to work on building a more climate resilient future for the region. And so the way we do this is just to put in a little plug for some of the work we do. To realize the vision that we want for the region, we've put together some tools that you can use, and I think this, hopefully the people who are here today with us. I know League of Women Voters members tend to be very involved and active in your own communities. And so I want to put in a little plug for a project that we did last year that we released called our Resilience Playbook. The playbook brings together a collection of strategies that really help make that connection between investing in nature, climate resilience, leveraging our natural and working lands as a defense mechanism to protect people by absorbing floodwaters, sequestering carbon, protecting water supply, providing buffers to wildfires. And along with this, our Resilience Playbook addresses critical issues like housing supply, housing justice, ensuring that we're building in a way that protects the environment and helps people with housing insecurity issues. So we're hoping that this can be a resource for you. And with this quick plug for checking out a Resilience Playbook, which provides that holistic view, I wanted to turn now to our topic of building a more climate resilient future and that climate housing connection. So, as we approach the issues around regional growth from a holistic lens, we see the connections between nature and climate resilience. And, we get a lot of questions about housing and how housing impacts the environment. And so that's one of the things I'll talk about today. So first, just to set the context, we really are in a dire situation from a housing perspective here in the Bay Area and throughout the state. And that's really been exacerbated over the last 10 or 15 years. For example, here in the Bay Area, as it mentions here today, from 2011 to 2017, our region added over 500,000 new jobs, which created economic opportunities for many, brought people to our region for those opportunities. And we like to consider ourselves a welcoming region. We welcome immigrants, refugees, people who are looking for a better life, people who are looking for a place to live that protects their civil rights and their values. And we can only do that if we have enough housing to welcome those people. And the estimated amount of housing you want to build as you're adding jobs is a ratio of 1.5 jobs for every housing unit. And this will avoid displacement and congestion and greenhouse gas pollution. Instead, we had a ratio of 4.3 jobs for every housing unit over the last 10 years, which has created the situation we're in today, decreasing significantly the number of units that are naturally affordable, pushing people further out, as Graciela mentioned as well. And we see throughout the country, although homelessness is an issue that has many sources of kind of why it happens and what we need to do to address it. One of the biggest indicators of homelessness and of places where there's a lot of homelessness issues are places where the rents are too high, where rents are rising, and basically high rents strongly correlate with high rates of homelessness throughout the U.S. And so this is a critical tool to reduce homelessness is to build more homes. Fortunately, building more homes within our existing communities has a significant number of climate benefits as well. So in the U.S., transportation is the biggest individual source of greenhouse gas emissions. 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions throughout the country come from transportation. In California, we actually have done a better job on converting to clean energy, but that means that 50% of, but we don't do such a great job with not driving. And so 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. And that amount of emissions has stayed flat in recent years, even while we've seen dramatic drops in the energy sector emissions. And part of the reason for that is while we have started to convert to cleaner cars, the people have to drive further and further, canceling out any benefits we have. So if we were able to increase housing and build more housing in infill areas, this could, there's been some good work done on the incredible impacts it could make to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There's other benefits as well, as far as benefits to us as individuals. We, if we need to use our car less, we don't have to pay the high gas costs. We benefit from those benefits around less travel time, less impact on families, and of course, less consumption of oil and gas. Along with the transportation costs, there's other benefits for building new housing within existing communities as well. Smaller homes, like apartment buildings, even fourplexes, ADUs, others use less emissions to build and use less emissions over time. This is including through sustainable construction and of course through better upgrades in heating and air conditioning from smaller units that are close together as well, have less energy needs. And one of the things about how we're addressing our housing challenges and how we're addressing our climate challenges is that these tend to be costly challenges that we're facing. And we know we're investing more as a nation and as a state in this, and the need is way greater than the resources we have. So one of the things we look for is ways that we can have no cost or low cost reductions in emissions, and also less costly impacts on, how do we build more homes in a way that is as cost effective as possible from a public standpoint, so we can focus public money and resources on those who need it most. And one of the benefits of zoning changes to allow more homes in cities is that's gives us the greenhouse gas reductions, and it also allows us to build smaller units, build different types of units that create a piece of that affordability puzzle for the people that need them, and again allow us to focus the scarce affordable housing dollars on our lowest income residents that need it the most. Again, I think this is, people who, we understand this need for this type of housing, but we've started to have a conversation at a statewide level and beyond around what type of housing is going to be sustainable for the future. And wealthier Americans have a much larger per capita footprint, a carbon footprint than moderate low-income communities, and that's primarily due to larger single-family homes, especially in affluent suburbs. Emissions can be 15 times higher than nearby neighborhoods that are built in a more dense way, closer to jobs, closer to transit. So at the neighborhood level, an average household in high-density urban San Francisco produces 6 metric carbon tons a year from transportation and housing costs, whereas a single-family household in a nearby suburban area produces 21. So that's close to a 4 times savings of building that housing within that core urban area. Another question that comes up is around water. Do we have enough water to build? What do we do about water? And I think that this is, again, a critical tool that we need to use as a state, as we're dealing with increased drought due to climate change, is actually building more housing within cities. A recent study done by the organization Spur showed that the Bay Area could add 2.1 million jobs, 6.8 million people, and 2.2 million homes in the next 50 years, and still offset all water use from this growth through modest improvements in water efficiency and more compact land use. Multifamily housing tends to have a much smaller lot size per housing unit, and outdoor landscaping, water for outdoor landscaping still is by far the largest water use of individual and residential uses. And so again, building the different types of housing, allowing that different type of housing really can benefit us from a water conservation perspective as well. So, we've talked about the benefits of building here. You've heard me from an environmental organization talking a lot about housing, and we do really see housing as an environmental strategy. But I also want to talk about how we think about where we build and where we protect to get those climate resilience benefits, as well as the many varied benefits of open space, including those that we've celebrated for years: clean air, clean water, recreation, local food, wildlife habitat. And the climate hazards we're facing make this even more important. Managed landscapes around cities can reduce the size and number of wildfires. This is critically important. As Graciela mentioned, this is something we're facing more and more as a region. And we've found that if properly managed and stewarded, greenbelts can reduce the size and number of extreme wildfires throughout the state, including agricultural land and other benefits as well. And as well as thinking about ensuring that we're not pushing people out to live in further and further into wildfire zones because we're not building enough in cities. Cities decide where to build housing. It's also important to ensure that we're building, into existing communities to protect, our wetlands around the bay and beyond. These wetlands can actually absorb floodwaters, sequester carbon, and protect biodiversity, which will help protect our shoreline and inland communities from the effects of climate change. And finally, the question is, okay, well, do we have enough land? We know we have a housing crisis. Do we have enough land to protect open space and to build the housing we need? And I would say not only, yes, we do have enough land. If every available infill parcel in California were to be developed to its fullest potential, the state would gain 4 million additional housing units while protecting over 350,000 acres of greenfield. However, we're not anywhere close to actually fulfilling the potential of our infill spaces. So we're excited that we have the opportunity to do that more with some state legislation that's come down, helping convert existing land that is, formerly commercial uses, abandoned malls and shopping centers, great places for building new housing. People are thinking creatively about how we convert commercial and office space that's no longer needed to housing, but we need to get creative to address these multiple challenges. So how to get involved is using our, recommend using the Resilience Playbook. You can get involved in your city and county housing element. We can talk about that in more detail as the questions come, but just to wrap up here, we do the work to protect our land, to build communities, to build a resilient future for all of us. And look forward to chatting more about this topic.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was not only a beautiful presentation, but very informative. I will begin reading questions, both of you guys, from the Q&A. I will begin with a question from James, which actually addresses what you just finished talking about, Amanda, which is, a bill I saw recently helps turn run-down malls into homes or shelters. Do we have any idea of how many malls that aren't used can be turned to communities like homes? Is this law going to lead to a significant change?
And I can take that. There's a projection that bill can actually help produce up to 2 million units. Now, I say up to 2 million because that depends on what happens right now, interest rates are going up, developers are going to have a hard time doing that. If lumber goes up, all of the actual economics of building can impact how many units, but potentially there are so many lots out there. Again, to what Amanda was saying, especially as more people are starting to shop online, a lot of the traditional ways that people would go to a mall and have we don't need that much land anymore for retail. And so the idea is, if we're thinking about how we're going to be working also, because the bill actually impacts retail, parking lots, and other types of office space that is underutilized. So again, statewide, if everything worked perfectly, right? If all the right conditions, about 2 million units.
Awesome, thank you. I actually have not heard of this law, so that is great to hear about. Another question is also from James. How can I, as an individual, address housing challenges and climate challenges?
Well, I can just briefly say, I touched at the very end, I mentioned housing elements. So a housing element is your city's plan for where it's going to build new homes for the next 8 years. It's a state mandated component of your general plan, which is basically your city's blueprint for growth and development. And this is a plan that cities have had to do for many years, but has had state laws strengthening the role of what a housing element is and how it can actually affect your community. And so all communities in the state are going through their housing elements. The Bay Area is working on theirs. I think most of Southern California has already done their housing elements for this cycle, and has by done, basically a city has to submit a plan that says, here are the places we're going to rezone to accommodate this number of housing. Here are the policies that we're going to implement to make it easier to build housing. Of course, cities can't force housing to be built, but they can do a lot to either make it easier or harder to build in their communities. I think all of us have experiences of both of those things. And local city council members often hear from loud voices from people who don't necessarily want change in their community for various reasons. And those are the people that tend to get involved, to speak up, and to show up at meetings. I think we do have a very outdated system of how we get community input it's often individual meetings that are not easily accessible, that people don't necessarily know about, or that people just have other things that they need to do in their lives. And so this is a way that I think, if you're interested in speaking up in favor of more housing, more affordable housing, more housing choices in your community, you can write a letter to your city council member or an email, or show up at these meetings, or start to follow the housing element process, because even getting your housing element adopted is just the beginning. Over the next couple of years, that rezoning needs to happen. Those policies need to be implemented, and then projects get proposed, and really stepping up and saying, hey, I'm in favor of these new apartments coming in my neighborhood. I'm excited that we're able to welcome new people into our neighborhood, even if it means that parking is going to be a little harder for me. That is a very powerful voice that you can have in your community.
And just to add to that, what we're talking about is really changing how California thinks about communities. And that's a really tough sell politically. I think, look, I grew up always dreaming of owning my own home, single family housing. The reality, though, is the way California grows is by adding more streets, adding more freeways, and doing low volume, like basically sprawl, right? That's how we grow. The reality is, because of climate change and the impact that it is having, we can't continue to grow that way. We have to think about this very differently. We also have to make sure that we're balancing, how do we keep in a healthy environment that can also help us fight climate change? To what Amanda was saying, we need to conserve natural undeveloped lands or farmlands. Like in Sacramento, for example, a lot of the rice fields that are used also are flooded to ensure that there's going to be habitat for birds and migration. Like, we are all in this integrated, interrelated ecosystem, and we are all part of it. And so what we're asking is, let's re-envision what this could be, right? We could have walkable communities. We can have areas where people have choices in the type of housing that works for them and their families. I'm not saying get rid of single family homes. I'm saying no, single family homes, and what else is available, right? If you're coming out of school, you're young, you're 20, you want to have a studio, we should have that for you. If you are now, in your early 30s and want to start a family or add to your family, you should have an option for that. If you want to live with your parents because they're getting older and want to take care of them, and you want to add an ADU, what we're talking about is diversifying the type of homes that we envision in California, and really being smart about how we develop to ensure that we are able to keep our parks, we are able to keep that open space that we all enjoy hiking in. And right now, the way we're growing, that is not a future that we see.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. It's great to hear both of your perspectives on that. Roma asked, the governor just signed some 40 housing bills. What should be the priorities for the new legislative session? Perhaps permanent funding.
Definitely. We definitely need a lot of money. When you look at the dearth of affordable production, and I'm talking for people that are, I'm trying to remember in Sacramento, I think for a family of 4, you're considered middle income if you are a family of 4 making $95,000. That means you have 2 working adults that are making $45,000 a piece. If you are below that, and let's say you're making $30,000, and so now you're at 60, that's the type of housing we need. We need affordable housing for people that are making, that are not making the ends meet. If you actually think of all of the essential workers, a lot of people after the pandemic were talking how, people can now move to more affordable places. But maybe that's not actually true for a lot of people. If you are basically like a bus driver, a grocery worker, a nurse, you might have a little more flexibility, but you're still showing up to work. And we still need those jobs to make our society function. And we need to make sure that low wage earners are actually able to also afford something that's not taking 50% of their income. So absolutely, I think we're going to need additional funding from the state to help support some of the construction that we need.
Thank you. Christy has asked, are there any regions in the US that represent a model for how to encourage sustainable development in California?
Well, I can just take a brief, just talk briefly. I think one thing that we don't quite realize in California is how that we really are an outlier in there's other places that have affordability challenges. It's an issue in a lot of cities and areas that have job centers, but most of those places compared to California still allow a lot more building, have a bigger diversity of housing choices, and I think we do make it easier to delay or stop development with a small number of people, either because of the threat of lawsuits or because of politicians' fear of the threat of lawsuits, or because of just the dynamic of how decisions are made at the very, very local level. And there's so many opportunities to derail a project, whether it's, you propose and then you go to the design review, then you go to the planning commission, then you go, there's all these steps that add costs and add opportunities for changing that are just more complex in California than, again, just about any other place. So I think we do like to think of ourselves as leaders and forward thinking here. But in the complexity and opportunities for projects to be derailed, unfortunately, we do make things a lot more complicated than other places. And I'm guessing Graciela has some ideas of how those could be streamlined. But I think moving toward much more ministerial approval of housing that meets certain standards. Housing that's in in downtown areas within cities should just be a lot easier to just go, that meets zoning codes, that it's not doing anything complicated. Just shouldn't be too complicated to actually do. And so there are actually many places that just do that.
Yeah, for example, if you think it actually, the codes started changing around the 1950s, but prior to that, we actually had a lot more fourplex and duplex, triplex. And a lot of, if you look at some of the communities, they feel like single family neighborhoods, but they're much more dense. And so what we're saying now is we need to go back to that kind of construction. What we've been kind of advocating for in the legislature is, let's talk about gentle density. We're not talking about 7 or 8 stories high. What we're talking about is, let's make it easier to construct those smaller apartment buildings. Right now, if you look at the construction that is happening in California, you have a lot of single family homes and then really, really high, like 100, 200, 300 units, right, multifamily. And what really is missing is this from 10 to about 25 units, right? And so that is really what we're focusing on, making it easier to build so that you are gently densifying. So people are not saying, oh, there's going to be next to my single family home, you're going to have a 7-story building. What we're saying is no, but we should maybe allow a 2-story building that has 7 units, right? And so or have a fourplex. Again, a lot of the times when we think about infill, what is possible, you can actually do more dense building that actually fits into the neighborhood, that feels like it's not drastically changing it. But over time, you end up having a really rich community. And at the end of the day, when you think about having a few more people in the community, you're also supporting small businesses. You're creating an ecosystem that allows for that small business to actually thrive. And so it actually starts generating the type of communities that we talk about, right? Walkable communities. You want to be able to go down 2 blocks and be able to go to a little store that you're able to buy what you need. And so what we talk about is that allowing enough density to allow enough people to actually have other businesses thrive. And the same thing goes with public transportation. There's always this chicken and an egg when it comes to public transit. It's like there's not enough ridership. Well, then therefore we can't add additional lane or additional routes, and therefore making it more consistent. And so at the end of the day, if we can have options, we can, especially now, if you have communities that are a little more dense, that are able to actually support more people, we also can diversify the type of transportation we have. Public transit, what now with e-bikes and just regular biking, walking. And so that is kind of what we're talking about, but it is going to change how we think about the community in California. And that cultural shift is what takes time.
Awesome. Thank you both for that answer. Actually, a perfect question to follow what you just said, Graciela, was from Ray, since owning a car is expensive, are affordable housing efforts discussing how to provide affordable transportation options for families, like cheaper electric cargo bikes?
Actually, it's funny that you say that. Yes, that has been more of a conversation. And this goes to, when you look at how California has grown, and the reason I focus on the streets, and you look at other models in Europe, especially, where they're starting to kind of have it be more pedestrian and bike friendly, because at the end of the day, it is still very dangerous to ride a bike in areas that are not protecting and prioritizing that form of transportation. And so there's new ways that are starting to come around where you're protecting, you're basically creating protected bike lanes. And with that, again, as people feel more comfortable, then they're actually using their bikes. E-bikes have become very easy. They allow you to kind of go further. And so conversations at the state capitol are talking about, well, maybe we should start investing in not just public transit, but how do we actually get other forms of transportation that allow people to go from point A to point B, especially if they're not going, tons of miles. This is another form of transportation. So yes, those discussions are happening. But I think as they're starting in Sacramento, back to a conversation that Amanda was touching upon, we kind of need more of the public voice to come out and say, this is a really smart solution. We need more of that, because at the end of the day, it's that public kind of pressure is what starts changing the conversation in, your local government and also in Sacramento. So if you want protected bike lanes, if you want additional infrastructure for bikes and other forms of transportation, we need to become more vocal and support those programs.
Okay, just to add, so I was actually having this conversation recently. So I just got an electric bike. And so now I've immediately become an electric bike evangelist. So I want to suggest, I'm giving this to Graciela, that you can go do this in Sacramento. What we should do is basically, like, the state sending out these different rebates. It has the state of California should send everyone an electric bike, just everyone in the state, because that would basically, once you have one and you ride on the street for any amount of time, all of a sudden you understand the benefits and the need for better infrastructure. And one of the reasons why we have so few bike lanes is because there is this whole complicated process, and it ends up being very costly to do something that doesn't seem that it should be, it should be that expensive. We also, again, the default people here is prioritizing cars, and people don't want to be sitting in traffic. And if you get that tipping point where you have more people experiencing, having that bike experience, as Graciela mentioned, there's places mostly in Europe that have made this switch, that you look 20 years ago, they were full of cars, and now they're full of bikes. And so the way to do that is just send a bike to everyone. Then you have less issues around them being stolen, because everyone would have one. And it would just create that momentum. And I'm kind of joking, but also kind of not, because I do think, it really would be, you could have some pilot places where you do this. It really would be transformative just to have that experience. Like, I'm not a super adept bike rider. We have a lot of hills here. I am a little bit intimidated, but the electric bike is amazing as far as just like, oh, I can get to the place I need to go. I don't have to worry about driving. It's so easy and accessible, even for, slightly uncoordinated and out of shape people. And so I am excited about continuing to explore that, because I think it's such a critical piece of the puzzle in how we make a more environmentally friendly, affordable, and livable city. And it's a huge piece. So let's start this movement here.
I am in Davis, so I am with you, Amanda, on once you start riding a bike, becoming a bike evangelist. I'm like, how have I ever lived any differently? A question from Rona is, how can we find the jobs to meet, I'm assuming meet housing production figures? Specifically, they're asking in Orange County.
Say that question again.
How can we, it might be just how it's worded, so I don't, how can we find the jobs to meet the housing production figures? So I think it's just a job and housing production question.
That's a really good question. I know that there's probably some of the local Chamber of Commerce will probably have the projections for jobs, and then also kind of the population growth. I'd have to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, the jobs housing numbers I have for the Bay Area from the Bay Area Council. So if there's an organization like that in Southern California, maybe they would have that. That's
what I'm thinking. We can probably tap into that resource.
Just out of curiosity, Amanda, how is like the employment market for those housing and like production companies like in the Bay Area? Just if you said you had those numbers, just out of curiosity.
So the jobs housing ratio is what I was talking about. So like the number of housing.
Oh,
yeah, not jobs in housing production, but jobs versus housing production. I think it's what the question is.
Oh,
got
like
it.
The number of jobs. Okay. Yeah. I think that's right, Amanda.
Jobs to number of housing. Okay. Thank you for figuring that out for all of us. So Christy is asking, can you speak on some of the coalition building that comes from identifying the intersection of housing and climate change? In addition to uniting climate and housing advocates, it seems that including human service agencies is a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity to really broaden the tent. And I mean, the way I know Graciela is Greenbelt Alliance being pulled into some housing coalitions that, were basically interested in getting a more environmental voice and we've been able to continue to think through how we have a more holistic vision for how we support each other in our priorities. And I think there are some, health and human services is another, critical, Graciela touched early on about some of the impacts of climate change, particularly on housing insecure people. And so I think there are some great things happening, and I really still see in the environmental community a need for more education. And so I think, a critical component of the coalition building is education around what the climate benefits of housing are, how the role, I think there's a lot of misinformation about what it means to build more housing, and how that affects affordability, and what we're doing for combating homelessness, for people who need services, ensuring that there's kind of a range of housing being built, and that we can again invest those scarce resources we have for housing subsidies on the people that need it most, and ideally supportive housing, and increasing that. So there's some real, I think, opportunities for education and building bridges, because there's still, I think, not enough information around that.
Thank you. I don't know if Graciela, if you were also going to say something earlier.
No, just basically second everything Amanda said.
So Jennifer is asking, this is specifically about the city of Menlo Park, so I have no idea if either of you have any insight specifically on Measure V there, but it's an attempt to control product built in single-family residential neighborhoods. And the question is, can you flesh out how housing element compliance consequences incentives will be used? I'm assuming it means specifically in the measure, but also if you guys have any insight on how housing element compliance consequence incentives are used in general.
What was the last part of the question again?
Can you flesh out how housing element compliance consequences and incentives are used?
So let me kind of start with the first question. I don't know what measure, the specifics of the measure, but it sounds like what has been happening in Sacramento, state legislation is trying to incentivize the construction of duplex, trying to basically increase the construction of what we call accessory dwelling units, or like the granny flats, inlet quarters, things like that. That has actually gotten a lot of pushback. That was really hard to do. So SB 9, which was the piece of legislation that passed last year, was incredibly difficult to do. And all it was doing is saying, we are going to allow that to happen under certain circumstances, right? And let me give you an example. If you own a 1/4 acre lot and you have a home, it's in some localities, it's really difficult. Prior to SB 9, it was really difficult to add an additional unit, even though you had enough land. So this SB 9 came in and said, actually, we're going to put some parameters. We can't just go ahead and build on the entire lot, but we are going to make it easier to build. And part of that is a lot of people that have that bought, let's say, the property back in the 1970s. Now they're retired, but they want to help their in-laws, or they want to help their adult children come back in. That was really hard to do. And now SB 9 allows them to subdivide, allows them to put an ADU. And that actually has gotten a lot of pushback in a lot of cities. A lot of cities are saying, nope, we don't want people to be able to do that. And so there has been a pushback. We started to see a lot of local measures trying to make it more difficult for that kind of construction to happen. So that is one issue. So the other thing in terms of compliance with the housing element, and we are starting to actually, there was a enforcement unit that was created in the Department of Housing in California, and they are supposed to kind of be looking and following up on the housing elements. And when the city says, yes, I'm going to try to kind of make it easy to build 1,000 units, are they really doing that? Are they really promoting policies at the local level that enable that 1,000 units to be built? Because on one hand, local governments do not build housing, right? They're not the developers, but they can make it very difficult to build housing. And so now you have an enforcement unit at HCD that is actually looking at what are local jurisdictions doing to make it easier to build. If you're putting up barriers, you actually can get sued by the state. And so, for example, Huntington Beach got a letter from the Attorney General saying, you're not doing what you're supposed to. If they are precluding affordable housing from being built, if they're precluding shelters from being built, those are the things that the state is watching more carefully. Now, what they're going to start tying it with is, if you don't have a housing element that is in compliance, you're not doing what you're supposed to, you're not going to have access to different pots of funding, whether it be transportation or additional housing dollars, but it's going to be harder for your government, local government, to have access to this funding. So those are some of the things that are, some of the tools that are being done. The other thing is that there's other remedies in there to say, if you don't allow housing, if you're not doing things to kind of be in compliance with the law, we're going to allow developers to say, go forth and develop, right? So there are basically now more sticks to make sure that the local jurisdictions are doing what they should. I hope that helps.
And I'll just add, Greenbelt Alliance has taken an opposed position to Measure V in Menlo Park, because it is a citizen initiative to try and limit the ability to make any changes to zoning in a good part of the city, in a very exclusionary high income area that has been really the epicenter of adding a ton of jobs. And that's great, but people do need a place to live. And there's many places in Menlo Park where there could be these small to medium, very well aligned with a neighborhood multifamily housing. And I think it would be a really positive thing for the people who would get to live there and the people that live there now as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad to hear too, Amanda, you had the insight specifically on Menlo Park, which was I was hoping. The last question I think we'll have for the evening is from Ray, who says, since I'm a transportation planner, I wanted to ask a follow-up question because I feel transportation and housing planners sometimes work in silos. Are housing planners discussing affordable transportation options for families as they work on affordable housing needs?
That's a great question. So in 2008, there was a piece of legislation that was passed, SB 375, that was actually trying to have housing conversations and transportation be one, right? And that legislation has led to some more discussions between the transportation and the housing world, but not enough. And so in the last couple of years, and this is actually a topic that is coming back up in the legislature, is we need to break those silos. Because again, going back to, if we want more public transit, we cannot have transportation and housing be in silos, because that it doesn't work. It has to be one conversation, because it goes back to, how do we make sure that as we are continuing to add housing, those people can move in the community, and not just move in terms of going to their jobs and using highways, but again, going back to the bike conversation. So all of this has to be integrated. So we're slowly getting there. Again, this conversation started back in 2008, 2022, and we're starting to realize, like, oh, maybe we actually need to break those silos down a little more. So sometimes progress is a little slow, but we're getting there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will wrap things up now, just so we don't bite into anyone else's evening time. Thank you both so much for joining us. That was so informative and so great to hear from both of you. A recording of the event will be sent to everyone who signed up to attend. And then if you guys have any follow-up questions, I can share my contact information with the attendees, and also the speakers' contact information if you have any follow-up questions. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.